We begin in Ottawa again today, where the inquiry looking into the federal government's use of the Emergencies Act to end the convoy protests in Ottawa last winter heard from protest organizers. Lawyers are asking them why they joined the convoy and if they had any idea how big the protest would become. The first witness today, Chris Barber, said he never intended for the demonstrators to take over downtown Ottawa.
The scope of the amount of vehicles that came in, I don't know how things went so wrong when we first arrived. Occupying or parking all over the city was never part of why we came.
The CBC's Catherine Cullen is at the inquiry and joins me now live. So Catherine, we just finished hearing from the second witness of the day. What did we learn from him?
Yeah, Andrew, from Steve Charland of a Quebec protest group, Les Farfadas, and I can certainly tell you that between him and Chris Barber, there are some themes emerging. Now, Monsieur Charland started out by explaining his point of view about all of this, why he was protesting. He talked about not specifically the mandates that were affecting truckers, but more broadly, a lot of the a lot of the mandates restricting people's activity around COVID. He said, "Listen, I can go to Costco, but I can't go see my grandmother. It just doesn't make any sense. Society has lost its way." The area where we really saw that overlap between the message from Chris Barber and Monsieur Charland comes around questions, first of all, of the intent of the organizers, both going to great pains to talk about the importance of being peaceful. We heard that word pacifique because Monsieur Charland was speaking French over and over and over, being peaceful during his testimony, and also a sense that they were not responsible for some of the activities of other protesters. Let's listen to a sample of that.
We've heard quite a few testimonies saying that there were disrespectful behavior, violence, and so on. Were you aware? Answer: no, not from us. We tried to deal with the Farfadet that were there, but we cannot control, or we cannot be around all the members of the Farfadet when they were getting out. Question: you agree with me then that the Farfadet are not speaking in one voice? That they don't speak in one voice? Yes, indeed.
In fact, later on, Mr. Charland went on to say that he had been told by some of the people that he knew in the protests that violence and vandalism had been caused by Antifa. That stands for, of course, anti-fascist, is a group on the sort of left end of the spectrum. Although he did say he didn't see any of that personally. He couldn't testify to any of it personally, but that was just something that he had heard, that there had been violence and vandalism, but not his people responsible for it. So, as I say, something of a recurring theme here as we get into this testimony from protest organizers.
And this morning, lawyers at the inquiry questioned one of the convoy protests' main organizers, Chris Barber. What were the highlights of his testimony?
Again, Andrew, he talked about the importance of keeping the public on side, he said, and that involved remaining peaceful. He talked about the fact that he said he discouraged some of the truckers from honking their horns. Personally, he found it quite irritating, particularly after that court injunction. And we know that that is of the litany of complaints from folks in downtown Ottawa. Certainly, the incessant sound of horns was something that they began to feel was a kind of violence. Despite the fact that Mr. Barber said that, some of his TikTok and social media posts were put to him in which he seemed to be sort of having a laugh about the honking of horns. And at one point, it's quite a short clip, it's not quite clear, but maybe even egging them on. He was also asked about sort of a standout revelation that's come through this inquiry, death threats against politicians, specifically about a death threat that was sent to Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland.
Chrystia Freeland will get a bullet to the head. Prepare to feel our wrath. Yours truly, the Canadian COVID government resistance. I assume you would reject this statement and any such action.
Unequivocally, yes.
Were you aware, sir, that on February 16th, the same day, the OPP apprehended someone in Ottawa who was wearing body armor and carrying a large knife, along with other knives, a sword, and machetes that were seized out of his truck?
I was not aware of that, no.
So just to be crystal clear here, none of that activity tied specifically to Chris Barber. It spoke to the broader question of the suggestion that all of this was intended to be peaceful, and yet these activities were happening at the same time. I should say Chris Barber is one of a number of witnesses that we're going to hear from this week that is currently facing charges related to activities during the Ottawa occupation. Those trials haven't gone forward yet. But he continued to insist, Andrew, that they knew that in order to keep the public on side, they had to remain peaceful. And when he was asked about particular activities, comments by another organizer using the word bullets, yet another organizer who had put forward a memorandum of understanding that suggested the illegitimacy of the current government. He just distanced himself from that. He said, I didn't know about that. This individual told me that, but I wasn't engaging with that. I was the guy out on the street. So as we continue over the course of the next few days to hear from a number of organizers, it will be very interesting to see to what extent anyone claims responsibility for some of those more remarkable moments. And also, I think we're going to get a better understanding of some of the factions within the convoy and some of the conflict around that.
Some fascinating testimony. All right, Catherine, thank you. The CBC's Catherine Cullen, live in Ottawa.